the bottom line from which everything else will flow, all my comments on this, is that there is no military pathway for Ukraine to avoid loss. I used to say there's no military path for Ukraine to win. Actually, I said from the very beginning and never changed that there's no way that Ukraine was ever going to win, and is defined by driving Russia back to its 1991 borders. That was just off the table. Any basic military analysis could tell you that at a strategic level where combat power is built at the national level, all the things were in Russia's favor, even with their disastrous performance on the tactical battlefield in the first 9 months. There's no way that Ukraine was going to win that war for very practical reasons, which I went on television a lot in the U.S. I wrote lots of articles about it, and it's played out exactly that way in terms of the things that go into winning a war. And that is primarily the manpower issue. Above all, wars are fought and won by men, not machines, not even money. You need all that stuff, but without men, you cannot win the war. And self-evidently, Russia has millions more men from which to draw from, and they haven't even gone to a mobilization yet. Besides that initial 300,000 when they got caught with their pants down, since that time they can just recruit people. Whereas the Ukraine side, people keep fleeing the country, and now that, of course, they have forced mobilization, which is not enough to offset losses. And even those that they grab and press gang off the streets, as you may have seen, they're losing 500 to 600 per day desertions on top of the losses. So when you add in the Russian superiority in the air, the air power also with drones, the engineering support, and then of course there's the artillery advantage, huge artillery advantage there. The drone, I think, is now in Russia's advantage. It was kind of imperative for a while. And then the defense industrial capacity, that may be the biggest one that gets the least amount of press because it's not very sexy, but Russia can produce no matter what is needed. They've got all the capacity to do it. And even though Ukraine has some long range drones, they've been hitting and causing some pain here and there. Their pain, that's part of any war, much less than the pain that Russia is inflicting on it. So all that together tells you there is no path that Ukraine can ever reverse this. If there was any chance, Mario, we would have seen it in 2023 when Ukraine had their best shot to try and drive to the Azov coast and broke their teeth on the first round. And ever since that time, they've been going back at a slow rate, but it's been going backwards. And the big issue, Keith Kellogg, over this past weekend, mocked Russia and said, well, they're only taking meters, not miles, and so they're actually losing, ignoring the fact that the Ukrainian casualties are unsustainable. See, Russia is doing this, a war of attrition, and they have calculated if it takes another year and a half, 2 years, whatever it takes, or 6 months, they'll just keep going down until the Ukraine side eventually gets ground down until it can no longer sustain itself. And there's evidence that that's moving in the path right now. So all that is a foundation to tell you then this is known issues. It should be known, and I have made it known to a couple of people several months ago inside the administration, this issue. They've got access to classified stuff, so they should know better than I do that this cannot be, a loss cannot be avoided. So the rational thing to do is get the best deal you can get right now to end the killing and the destruction and the loss of territory on the Ukraine side to give you the best chance for the future here. The worst thing you can do is ignore all that and just keep pretending like, well, this sanction will do work when the last 3.5 years haven't. These long-range strikes will work when all the rest 3.5 years haven't. And then ignoring the Russian manpower advantage, their industrial capacity, ignoring all that, all you're going to do is guarantee the destruction of Ukraine, the loss of potentially hundreds of thousands more men and more territory, far more than what you're going to lose if you agree to the deal that's on the table right now. So what we're doing is irrational, it's illogical, and I argue immoral because we're wasting away, we're happy to waste away the people in Ukraine towards something that is militarily unattainable. That is my overall position, and I think the evidence lines up with that.
So what do you think, how would a peace deal look like? You've got, Kherson, Crimea, Donbass, Zaporizhia. You'd expect them all to be within Russian control? Is that the only way to peace now?
That's the only way. It is the only way. That's what Putin is.
Does that include Ukraine pulling out of the territory they still hold today?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what Putin has been saying since June of 2024. And they are still saying, as of this day, the last time I saw a specific reference, I think it was in Istanbul, those 12 points that they put in there, they're basically saying the same thing they did last time, same thing that they're saying now. You have to withdraw from the Donbass. You have to withdraw from the Zaporizhia and all that. And again, those are horrible conditions. They're terrible. They're ugly. But Mario, they're only bad because we rejected every diplomatic off-ramp we could have had that got a much better deal for Ukraine. You can go all the way back to the Minsk Accords. Just imagine if we had done the Minsk Accords, only Donbass, not even Donbass, only parts of Luhansk and Donetsk would have been independent or under Russian control, and all the rest of it would have been under Kiev control. And then when we didn't do the February 2022 invasion, which led to the Istanbul Agreement in April, or the terms rather, that would have been a much, much less deal. And eventually Russia said they would have withdrawn once the rights of the Russian-speaking population had been controlled. We rejected that too. We refused to have a negotiated settlement in November 2022 when Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Miller said, this is your best chance because you just gave Russia two big black eyes here, and they're not going to be this weak, because he knew what I was talking about, that Russia had the capacity and they would recover from that. And of course, that's the way it worked out. So now here we are with this horrible, ugly deal that Ukraine would have to agree to, or, and this is my position, and this is what the evidence shows, if we don't take that ugly deal that you just, I mean, even the words coming out of your mouth just sounded so reprehensible. But not doing that deal means it's probably not going to just be the 4 administrative borders of the oblast. It probably will be up to the Dnieper River and maybe even further than that, especially when you're talking about the potential for Odessa, maybe linking up with Transnistria in the south, all of which are on the table and plausible. If Ukraine doesn't have any chance to avoid defeat, Russia has a legitimate possibility, though nothing's ever guaranteed. But there is a path to where they can take all that over time. And there is no path in the other way. So if you don't take this deal now, then the end result will probably be far, far worse for Ukraine in the future. It's tragic. It's horrible. But and you can blame Russia for it because they're the perpetrators. They're the ones that are doing this. But you have to, in my view, have equal, if not greater blame on us because of our foolish decisions and unwillingness to reach a logical decision to have a negotiated settlement earlier, where we could have preserved far more of Ukraine and had far more rights for what was left of the government. But because of our unwillingness to ever acknowledge truth, and Joe Biden and his administration deserves the lion's share of the blame here because they're the ones that set the stage for this. But the Trump administration, for all of his claim that he's going to end the war, has not used our leverage against the one person who really has it on, and that's Ukraine. And so now he's just kind of passively going along and allowing the war to continue on.
Europe seems to have stepped up significantly in this war under Trump. You know, they're funding most of the aid right now. I think they're providing more aid to Ukraine, correct me if I'm wrong, than the US.
Yes.
How a lot of people like to shit on Europe and their capabilities, but is that fair? Look, I was looking at, I know it's very basic, but I was looking, researching on Grok, the strongest militaries, and there's like an index they use to rate each military. I'm sure you know which index that is. And Europe is, South Korea is surprisingly powerful as a military, but Europe's still up there. France, the UK have strong militaries. That's your area of expertise. What are Germany, France, Spain, the UK? What are their capabilities?
They are good on paper. If you're comparing tanks to tanks and planes to planes and missiles to missiles, you can see, yeah, that's a very formidable force. But as I said a second ago, wars are fought with men, not with machines. And in that regard, the West is way, way behind Russia in every capacity that matters. And let's just take UK, right? They have I think on paper something like 185,000 active duty force of all their armed forces, but they are hard pressed to produce one single armored division. That's it. There was a piece on Sky News a couple of weeks ago where they were saying, okay, if this whole coalition of the willing thing comes into power and they're able to have a European force of the reassurance force or whatever they're calling it today, they said, of course, that would have to be from all these countries. And they said they would probably have to have, when you're talking about rotations and a number of things to do, rotating in and out, et cetera, you'd have to have a force of about 300,000 people. Remember, Russia has somewhere around 700,000, 650,000 in Ukraine itself. So just within their country, not what they have in the rest of the country. And so you'd have to have about 300,000 to patrol whatever this demilitarized zone in this theory that it ended up having the war ended. And he says, where would those forces come from? And he had this big graphic on his map. Sean Bell from Sky News, a former military guy, and he said, if you took all of the deployable forces of the UK, that would get you maybe 10% of that, and the same with France. You could get maybe 10% of that. So there's like 20%. Where's the other 80% going to come from? And nobody else wants to give any of those troops because they don't have them to give. But that tells you something, that that the UK and France have such a small number of actual deployable forces. I mean, they're not in a position to fight anybody. And I'll tell you one other thing that it's not on any paper, that should be a real part of these calculations, and that is the combat capacity of the forces. Russia has had 3.5 years to make itself incredibly capable militarily in modern warfare. They understand the speed of things. They understand the lethality, the mental aspect of enduring under this incredible bloodshed. And I've talked to fighters on both sides of this line on my show throughout the last year and a half or so, and just have found it fascinating that while there's obviously a lot of animus and antipathy between the two, they have a lot of respect for one another. And even by the Russian account, the second best army in the world is the Ukrainian army. Even as much as they've been hit and as much as they've been hammered, they consider them, and so do the Ukraine side, they consider them even better than the NATO side.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think that there's some justification to that, because we mentally don't know what it's like to fight under those conditions. Consider all of our so-called combat experience, and I'm including myself in this, when I was on active duty in the U.S. Army. So I had one big high-intensity combat in Desert Storm. I was a second lieutenant at the time, and was in the Battle of 7th Eastern Tank Battle, and and all that stuff. So my experience, we only had a 100-hour war, so it's I can't even compare it to what these guys are enduring here. But at least I've seen that kind of high-intensity tank-on-tank fights. And then the rest of my experience was 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, in a counterinsurgency kind of situation, a coin, as they call it, et cetera. And I can tell you that is the only combat experience of anybody in uniform today. There's a handful of people that went to Baghdad in 2003 in the Iraqi OIF that we had here, but that was also a big asterisk on that because the Iraqi forces were so pathetic. But even that limited one, there's not many of those guys that are still in. And our combat experience is fighting against like the Taliban or insurgents in Iraq, and that is not a fraction of what it would be if we had to fight somebody like Russia, who knows how to fight the big. It's a pure on pure.
Warfare's changed a lot since, like, the drone warfare we're seeing now is incomparable to the wars that you and others have fought
100%.
in Iraq and Afghanistan. But that brings another question, because you talked earlier that wars are fought with men, not machines. But aren't we seeing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, but aren't we seeing drones fighting those wars more and more, especially with AI allowing those drones to operate? You give it certain instructions, a certain target, and you allow it to operate without any human interaction. We're seeing more and more of that warfare. And Israel's a good example of Israel's a good example of their ability with obviously with their fighter jets, but also with their intelligence and their AI capabilities to allow them to strike all the Iranian targets. Isn't that making the wars men a lot less important in wars today? Because that's what I was researching that yesterday. I was trying to understand it, so maybe it'd be perfect to explain it to me. Because everyone talks about how Russia's winning because Ukraine just does not have enough men. But that kind of contradicts the drone warfare we're seeing that does not require men. So can you help me explain why there's
there's no contradiction in my view at all. The wars are won with men, not machines, but they are incredibly important. And without the machines, you can't win. So the manpower still works. For example, a drone you can fire an FPV drone or one of these fiber optic drones, et cetera, or one of the bomber drones. You can do that, and you can blow up a tank or a truck or hit the trench line, et cetera. But you can't take the trench line, and you can't hold the trench line unless you have men. So that's one of the things that the Russians have been doing. They've been hitting these trench lines, but then they have the men to go and take them. Ukraine doesn't have the men to be able to defend them, so they end up having to slowly pull back. So you still have to have infantrymen. And without that, the drones are helpful. And that's one of the reasons why the advance has been so slow by the Russian side, because there has been a real lack of understanding of what that does to modern warfare. Even somebody as capable as the Russian side and the firepower advantages they have, the Ukraine side is still not without its capacity. So like I said, up until recently, earlier this year, I did some interviews on the drone operators on both sides of the line, and both of them agreed that it was about parity at that time. But now then Russia's advancements and their development capacity is now, the production capacity is now tilting the balance against Ukraine, but they still have a lot, and they have their own domestic capabilities as well. Keith Kellogg actually over the weekend gave them credit, said that they have said so many advancements, and that is 100% true. So that has slowed Russia, but because of the manpower imbalance, it's not enough to stop Russia. And the casualties cost on the ground there, if you lose so many men, you don't have drone operators, and you can't stop the onslaught from the other side, you're still going to lose. So that's why it always comes back to the manpower.